Hi, I'm Julijana Mladenovska-Tesija, Evangelical Theological Seminary, Osijek, Croatia, and I will talk about the city of Osijek as a wartime peace laboratory. I actually play around with René Girard a lot and with Appleby. From Girard, I explore actually the use of his mimetic theory, and from Appleby, I explore the use of the ambivalence of the sacred. The paper that I will present will give an ethnographic account of the city of Osijek during the Croatian War, 1991-1995, when the grassroots efforts of women and men to help to each other, to talk to each other, and even engage in different kinds of activities, peace-related activities, were not rare and were occurring in the midst of the missiles dropping on the city, because the people that were engaged in this kind of activities, peace activities, believe that war and violence are not the answer and that they could do something about it. So I was curious to find out why they were doing this kind of activities and what they believed in, because it was also very scary and difficult for them to be part of this kind of activities when they were considered to be traitors to the Croatian defense. So the main hypothesis of this paper is that the grassroots peace activities that happened during this period and in this particular city actually can contribute to the dominant narrative of the victorious homeland war, and can enrich this dominant narrative. And to that end, I use stories. I made 25 interviews with the local grassroots peacemakers. Out of these 25 interviews, I present 3 short stories from Osijek, and I also present my experience with the visit of the Vukovar Museum of Homeland War, because I think that that museum is interesting, especially if we analyze it through the mimetic theory of René Girard. The rest of the stories that are related to Osijek can be analyzed also through the Appleby ambivalence of the sacred theory. I divided the paper in 2 parts. The topic of the first part is mirroring the scapegoat, and in here I discuss about the city of Vukovar, while the second part is mirroring the peacemaker, and in here I discuss the city of Osijek. What I will present to you is how my visit of the city of Vukovar looked like. So I was there, I was in the Croatian Memorial Center of the Homeland War, and 2 very interesting things happened. The first, I experienced the virtual reality when I was part of the so-called flight of the Antonov airplane over the city of Vukovar. This flight took me back into 1991, and I could feel how it looked to fly low and to fly in a total darkness. And I could see people in the plane throwing bags with food over Vukovar. This whole flight lasts something like 10 minutes. But what was even more scary and also very interesting as an experience at the same time was another part of this museum that was a small room that was converted to present how the Serbian prisoner camps look like, and the floor was covered with hay. There were yuta bags closely packed to one another that served as beds, and to my surprise there were several metal constructions that were placed next to the wall to depict the particular pose that the captives had to take when the soldiers entered into the camp, and I felt very uneasy when the curator said that they often asked visitors to try this pose and that children do so gladly. So this fact that they use memory as a embodiment, as an impression over the body, as apart from the experiential learning, was really shocking to me. So the creation of the dominant state narrative in the case of Croatia is strongly tied to the city of Vukovar and to the idea of the heroic nation that was attacked by the Serbian paramilitaries. This process was subsequently followed by creating Vukovar memory sites, monuments, war centers, and collections, museums, exhibits to support the process of national building. These sites store the memories of something that Girard calls the good violence, that is put in motion, that puts in motion the ritual by means of staging the encounter between the victim, the good, the defender, the captured Croat, and the perpetrator, the bad, the aggressor, and the paramilitary Serb, in a very safe space that actually offers an emotional discharge from the generated conflictual desire, says Girard. Combined with 6 other cities around the city, such as the Vukovar Hospital, Memorial Cemetery, Massacre Monument, etc., etc., these points make stationaries of the Vukovar's ethno-religious pilgrimage and contribute to the collective self-image that is constructed in accordance to the historical and political challenges, as Assmann says. As such, this narrative appears obsolete, backed by collective memory, and closed for revisions or adoptions of new insights. But it also reveals the limbo in which its divided citizens of today, Croats and Serbs alike, live in, torn between the wills to remember and the oblivion, as Nietzsche would say, burdened by the legacy of the past, the still present negation of crimes, and lack of efficient persecution of war criminals due to inefficient cooperation between the two capitals, Zagreb and Belgrade. In his book Violence and the Sacred, Girard offers at least 3 ways how this staged life in Vukovar could be understood. The first, he says, it includes creating a narrative that allows the spectator to discern the temporal spatial coordinates, the plots, and the characters. At this point, Girard defines the good and the bad violence, where the good is used to sanction the later. The scapegoat consequently becomes not only the leading figure of the plot, but also the means to catharsis. Vukovar takes upon itself both the war, the crisis, that had to be overcome, and the victory, achieved through restoring the social justice. Its memory sites are a cap to escalation of the mimetic violence and to restoring peace. At this point, the city also arrives at the point of the savior that has been over and over again brought back to life and immortalized, says Girard. In this sense, Vukovar stations heal, though only temporarily, all the ills of the war which injured the body of Croatia and offer a cathartic experience, a self-regulating mechanism of the mimetic violence. And here Girard comes with a warning. The scapegoat ideology is produced by the violence and serves to regulate it, but provides no actual, lasting healing, just a social order. For a true cure, according to Girard, 3 steps are needed: to decline the complicity to the dominant narrative, to replace fear with love, and to offer reconciliation. These steps, Girard knows, are neither fast nor easy, yet to make Jesus' sacrifice a paradigm towards peace means to reconstruct the imaginary, the rituals, the sites, as well as identity that is built upon it from victim's perspective. This perspective focuses on Christ, says Girard. He died for us all, enemies included. He died instead of us so that nobody should be scapegoat again. He is the sacrifice that ends the sacrifice. So what about Osijek? Osijek is only 36 kilometers on the northwest actually of Vukovar, and it lies on the crossroads between the east and the west, the Zagreb, the Sarajevo, Ljubljana, and other capitals, in between the Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, Islam, and Reformation. During the war, it was surrounded by 3 sides. It was heavily bombarded but not taken. Unlike the neighboring Vukovar, which was besieged, devastated and kept under the Serbian rule for almost 8 years, Osijek remained relatively free. This position, as well as its heterogeneous structure, makes it an interesting case study on many levels. After the fall of Vukovar on November 17, 1991, Osijek found itself under heavy shelling by the Yugoslav National Army and the Serbian paramilitaries, which lasted for almost a year. In these circumstances, ecumenical and interreligious interaction were found very challenging, especially due to the competing truth claims about the role particular religious communities had in the ongoing war. Yet, this kind of peace-related activities were not rare. During the course of 1999, at least 8 events were organized with an aim to prevent war and support peace. Ecumenical prayer that will host in January, the Osijek INFEMIT conference in April, the Concert for Peace and Hope by the Zagreb Chamber Orchestra in May. In September, meeting of Osijek intellectuals, which actually founded later the Osijek Center for Peace and Nonviolence. During the course of November and December, 2 meetings within the Pentecostal Church occurred with the mayor of Osijek about the situation in the city when Agape, the humanitarian association of the Evangelical Pentecostal Church, was launched. At the same time, 2 meetings were held between the high official representatives of the Catholic Church and the Serbian Orthodox Church, again in a nearby Slavonski Brod and Sremski Karlovci. So several conditions had to be met for these activities to be possible. A relatively favorable political climate of the city of Osijek, with the moderate mayor, Zlatko Kramaric, who was trying to balance the ultra-nationalists led by Branimir Glavaš. The relative protection offered to the city of Osijek from the Osijek Territorial Defense Forces. They played an important role for the military defense of the city and for the moral feeling of the citizens of Osijek that they are protected. And of course, the presence of the international community. The UN protection forces were deployed in Osijek as soon as April 1992, following the Vance-Owen peace plan. Religious presence and activities in and around the city of Osijek in the period from 1991 to 1995 were manifold and complex, and often worked at cross purposes. Religious communities were supporters of their ethnicities as well as bridge builders to the others. Cognizant of this complexity, Appleby elaborates 3 modes of operation of the religious communities that may lead to conflict transformation and that were present in Osijek: the crisis mobilization, saturation, and interventionist mode. For instance, charismatic religious leaders catalyzed religious resources, and in here I can mention the Catholic Archbishop Kuharic, the Orthodox Patriarch Pavle, Protestant Dr. Kuzmic, and several others, and engaged in activities which at times were in resistance to the broader political climate. And this is a proof of the crisis mobilization mode of Appleby. While mainstream religious institutions were largely unprepared to play the role of conflict transformer and had to adapt to the moment, the grassroots, and here comes the saturation mode of Appleby, actually entered into this space that was left empty and mobilized their members and networks from other countries, offering relief to the suffering people that was both material and spiritual. And this is a claim from Dr. Kuzmic and the interview taken in 2019. These activities were spontaneous and diffuse, produced unstructured series of reactions to the threat or onset of deadly conflict, and over time grew into structures that helped conflict transformation, such as Agape Humanitarian Assistance, Caritas, the Catholic Humanitarian Assistance, but also other activities, other organizations such as the Osijek Center for Peace, etc., etc. The problem with this mode that Appleby talks about is that it appears only where there are environmental conditions for it to flourish, which in the times of the war are rare. So Osijek is perhaps that kind of a rare place where religious and cultural institutions were relatively strong and deeply entrenched in the society, and where the political conditions, were favorable for them to blossom. At the same time, Osijek was a place where external religious and secular actors intervened to nurture the fragile, sometimes embryonic life of the reconciliation movement and the civil society. This external intervention mode is the third one that Appleby mentions as very important to secure peace. So, instead of a conclusion, memorials of war are not bad, but by the way of excluding the other, the strange, the minority, for instance, the stories of Serbs who fought alongside the Croats, or the peacemakers at all sides of the division lines who offered helping hand to one another, present the war in a ritual fashion, giving the audience a simple clue who is officially considered the good, and staging for the repetition, for the mimetic occurrence of the violence. The stories from Osijek, on the other hand, point to different ways of response. In this case, neither war nor religion could be squeezed into boxes with permanent labels. Religion has been and still is an important factor in the Croatian society, and as a player with other players, it shares the responsibility of the outcomes of the conflict. Its ambivalence makes it susceptible to be mobilized for violence as well as against it. In this war, it seems that religions opted more for the first than they hoped and worked for the later. Appleby stresses the need for a specific training in peace and conflict resolution for religious representatives and the laity, as well as greater levels of religious literacy as a way to leverage or present the use of the sacred violence. The absence of such produces a situation in which the faithful, the potential base of the independent political power of the churches, are not mobilized for the non-violent forms of religious activism. The city of Osijek, with its past of being surrounded but not defeated, victorious because of its brave defenders and because it persecuted the wrongdoers and opted for peace on various levels, majority Croatian but open to minorities, can be a good example of a place that invites research about its colorful past and promotes stories of peace activism within different religions that are part of its identity. Maybe a museum that celebrates peacemakers as well as the Erdut Peace Agreement can be that spatial and temporal turning point for bringing the culture of nonviolence to a level that it becomes an ethos of all political, religious and social living in Croatia.